Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kensington Konnect. We are so excited to see you and thankful that you are here with us. Today's session is all about wellness and you. I know it's been just about a year since the pandemic started for a lot of us, and I'm very happy to introduce Erin Recius. She is a licensed professional counselor, and she did a series for us back in October called Take Care of You. And we loved it so much and really loved her so much that we really wanted her to come back for our Konnect series. So she's going to be talking all about coping with COVID fatigue today, which I know is a big topic. You know, we're all getting tired and all that as we come up on a year since the pandemic started. So I will turn it over to Erin. If you have any questions, feel free to write in the chat box. I will be relaying those to Erin as we go throughout her presentation. But without further ado, thank you, Erin. And she's coming live from Colorado. So we want to give a big warm welcome to Erin.
Hello. Welcome. It's great to be here. It's as Connor said, we are a year into this. It's hard to believe it's been a year. But coping with COVID fatigue, I don't know one person who's not dealing with COVID fatigue to some extent. So we're going to talk all about it today. I'm going to certainly talk about some of the challenges, but then also, most importantly, some strategies on how to deal with COVID fatigue and how to feel better today. So as Connor said, you know, it's hard to believe it's been a year and we're all over it. I know we're all over it, but we're still in it. So then it becomes, how do we deal with what is, and how do we create a sense of hope and I guess relief from what feels like an enduring of what is. So I'm going to provide insight into how to thrive rather than just survive this. And hopefully you'll find some opportunities to do just that for yourself after today's talk, if it's not happening currently. There's going to be time for questions in the middle. So questions, comments. I find that it makes for a richer kind of, even though it's kind of one-sided and I'm talking, Connor's going to field some of those comments in the chat, and then we're going to have time for those midway through. And it's really questions or comments. So as I go through some of this material, if anything's percolating for you, don't be shy. I find that other people have similar experiences and similar questions. So would definitely welcome those. Before I get into that though, let me give you just a quick spiel on who the heck I am and what do I know, just for those who don't know who I am. I've been in the health and wellness industry for, gosh, about 25 years. And I'm coming to you from City of Boulder in Colorado. And I got my start in the fitness industry, did that for about 10 years, and then segued into mental health in 2005. So I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I currently operate a private practice virtually, of course. And but then over the years, I've segued into also the wellness community programs. So corporate wellness, community wellness, as well as recreational wellness, and then private wellness retreats. And so I've directed some retreats along the East Coast, but now I'm just comfortable in my own home doing private practice, as well as wellness education for organizations. The area of expertise that I have is, like I said in the bio, is health psychology, which really looks at the influences on our health and well-being. And we are all under a big one right now, of course, with the pandemic. So, but other influences on health and well-being could be family, our social situation or lack thereof. It could be environment. It could be physical health, psychological health, our cultural messaging. So that's kind of under the umbrella of health psychology that will inform the lens in which I present today's topic today. Okay, so let's dive into this. 1 year in, the world has been basically closed, although we're slowly but surely starting to open back up. But really, when this hit a year ago, we did not see what was coming. No one did. And at the very, it's an understatement to say that we are and have been in uncharted territory. fear, uncertainty, some losses, just the stress of it all has been a lot. And I don't know one person who hasn't been impacted by this by in some way, shape, or form, meaning how could we not be? And we're still navigating this, of course. Okay, we're still navigating what has become the new norm. And let me tell you, in the work that I do as a counselor, I mean, collectively, one person after another is, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired. Is this ever going to end? When is this going to end? We miss social gatherings. We miss our loved ones if we haven't seen them in a while. We miss going to Starbucks and sitting amongst each other without a mask on. We miss so much of what was. But here we are in what is. And most certainly it's been a collective source of stress and coping. And of course, it's going to impact our well-being on a mental, emotional, and physical level. And it's really about how to kind of climb out of that so that we feel like we're just in the survival mode of things. But what's tricky is, we're still under the mandate, of course, and understandably, to socially distance, to stay at home if we can, to be very careful and use precautions when we're out and about. The mandate to socially distance that has been in place for a year, and are really the restrictions that are in place and the parameters. When gatherings of all kinds stopped, I mean, that just came to a screeching halt. What happened is that those social interactions, obviously, for many of us, were no longer there. And especially for those who lived alone, it just became like this vacuum. And, when you think about sporting events, and this is from professional sporting events to maybe our kids' sporting events, to our own, we couldn't have church gatherings anymore. We couldn't go to the gym. School now is remote learning, or it could be hybrid depending on where you live, and then working from home. All of this has created such a tidal wave of change that it's kind of left some of us gasping for air, and really not understanding fully how much of those casual social interactions were having a positive impact on our mental and emotional well-being until now. So flash forward a year and we're still under those parameters, and understandably. What I'm seeing in the work that I do is that a year in, the loneliness has kind of crept into this chronic loneliness, and for some of us, an isolation. Those of you who might be, getting remote working or remote schooling with kids at home, or even just being at home with a loved one, and you're retired, but there might be too much alone time. So there might be some of this happening in the relationship. And what I'm hearing is that the most healthy, connected relationships are being tested right now, because there is so much alone time, and there's not other avenues for support, for connection, for those social outlets as much. And so those two dichotomies, the too much together time and too much alone time, have really created some issues for some folks, for sure. And then this third one, which is, again, a great thing, we have this vaccine, but what I'm hearing in sessions is that it's also inviting another level of stress of, okay, when am I going to get this thing? Some of us have it and some of us don't. Some of us are in the process, of getting it. I worked with a client last week where she was on hold for 3 hours with CVS in the state that she resides in, just to get an appointment for her and her husband. And it's been keeping her up at night. So wonderful that we have a vaccine to turn to. It's also creating a certain level of stress of, when am I going to get it? I want to see my loved ones. And so it's still kind of in this place of enduring. And it's certainly been stressful. We're still in the tunnel. We're still in the tunnel, even though there's a light at the end of it. Now, this is the kind of the COVID umbrella of stress, the collective source of stress that we've all been experiencing to some degree. But then there's also our own personal circumstances, right? There was a pre-COVID experience of life, and currently what's happening in our world and our circumstances, our job situation, if we have one, our relationship situation, caretaking others, We might have loved ones in hospitals, right? So we might have these situations that life was happening before COVID hit. And what I find is that kind of threw a a grenade in the middle of it. It might have intensified some of our circumstances and made things feel worse for a while. An example too of kind of life happening is the weather. My sister lives in Houston, Texas, and her pipes burst and she was without water and electricity for about a week. And she's a teacher trying to do hybrid teaching. So needless to say, her world got really stressful for a while. And that's just one example of so many that I hear from clientele where it's just stress on top of stress, and it can feel like a stress sandwich. And then it's like, ah, gosh, something's got to give. And what's happening is in that feeling of, oh, God, when is this going to end? I'm tired. Is that we're really being forced to go within, and we're really being forced to reach out for support and to find ways in which to to get some help through what feels like it's still a very challenging time. Now, the good news is this, is that our bodies are built to handle stress, especially acute stress. And I want to talk about the two types of stress quickly. And acute stress is, it's basically when we need to have an immediate response to a stressor. Okay, our bodies were built to protect us and to guard us against that threat. And that's a great thing. But what happens when we experience acute stress is there are stress hormones that are released. There's definitely a biochemical reaction, but the two main hormones that are released are adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is what increases our heart rate and our respiration. Okay, it helps to bring blood into our extremities in case we do need to fight or flee. So it prepares us to fight or flee from the threat. Freeze is another response to an acute stressor. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but that's usually when we just kind of go into shutdown mode. That is a form of protection. It's not worse or better, it just is. But what's happening is that when adrenaline is released, it's enabling us to kind of handle that situation. But what also gets released is cortisol. Cortisol helps to regulate blood pressure. It helps with fluid balance in our system as the adrenaline is being released in our system. It's also serving as an anti-inflammatory response to the other chemical reactions in the body. So we want these hormones to be released when we're experiencing acute stress. Examples of that would be, say, an argument with a loved one, right? You just 0 to 60. It could be a near miss accident when we're driving. It could be anything that we're not expecting, and all of a sudden we need to respond in that moment or react in that moment. Now, we want that response in the system to a degree. Now, chronic stress is tricky because chronic stress is when we have that stressor that's definitely more underlying. Okay, it's like the thorn in our sides. Obviously, COVID is one of them, but it could be maybe relationship stress. It could be job stress. If you're a parent, it could be parenting, some of those things that are just kind of there and you kind of deal with them on a regular basis, maybe. Okay, so those become personal to you. And what's happening is when we're under chronic stress, and I think over the last year, many folks have been experiencing a degree of chronic stress based on COVID, let alone what's happening in their own personal worlds. But what's happening physiologically is that our stress hormones maybe aren't being released at that acute level, but they're elevated. And in that elevated state, what's happening is it's really hard for us to relax, to come down. Too much cortisol in the system actually suppresses the immunity. It increases our blood pressure. It decreases libido, and it contributes to obesity, just to name a few of the side effects of too much of these stress hormones, particularly cortisol circulating in the system. So it sounds depressing, but the key is that we can manage chronic stress. Stress happens, life happens. What we can definitely be proactive in managing what feels like a stressful situation by functioning with a different way of responding in life. And we'll talk about that. But some of the signs of chronic stress are these are the ones that I'm hearing about in my sessions with clients. And an increase in anxiety and depression is one. That's probably the most common one. So even if it was there before, it's intensified, a lot of thoughts and rumination around fear and uncertainty. Sleep issues, that's one that I'm hearing about, where it's hard to get to sleep, or people pop out of sleep in the middle of the night and it's hard to get back to sleep because they start thinking. Muscle aches, headaches, that's another one I'm hearing about. When we're stressed, again, we have to think about those stress hormones. They tense the muscles so that we can respond. Under chronic stress, we may not be relaxing those muscles because of what's going on in our system. Irritability, low tolerance. One of the phrases I've heard from many clients is, I'm just not myself. I don't have the patience I used to have. That's usually a sign of chronic stress. Changes in appetite is another one. People, I find, kind of, well, it's usually on one side of the coin or the other. So basically either their appetite gets suppressed because they're so stressed out that they can't eat. So that's one that I'm hearing about. Probably the most common one that I'm hearing about is, all I can do is eat. I'm hungry all the time. There's an emotional contributor to that, but there's also a physiological element in that. When cortisol is being released at an elevated level, maybe not at the acute level, but at an elevated level, what's happening is that it's also dysregulating our appetite hormones. So the appetite hormone ghrelin, it's spelled GHRELIN, which you can think of growling. It's our hunger hormone. That hormone gets kind of activated more and we feel hungrier more often. So there is a physiological component that might be happening, let alone the emotional self-soothing cravings that might be coming into play. We'll talk more about that. And then this last one is substance overuse, and that kind of goes into play with the food piece. We might be using food as a way to cope with stress. We also might be using alcohol, other substances such as drugs. And I find that, there's certainly addiction can be enhanced or cultivated. It can be triggered, certainly under stress. What I'm finding, mostly what I'm hearing with folks that I work with, is that there's just an overuse. There's a dependency. There's I'm drinking a couple glasses of wine every night and then I wake up not feeling well, or I'm drinking wine, which leads to food, which leads to TV, which leads to, and so there's kind of this disconnect. And what happens is this is the tricky part with those, what I call false fixes, is that they work. And they work in the moment. They work temporarily. They really serve to numb, to distract, to disconnect from what feels like suffering and anxiety or sadness or fear. And so they provide a reprieve, at least for a little bit of time, from what might feel overwhelming. So these are just a few of the ones that I hear about in the sessions with clients. Netflix binge watching, I don't know, I'm guilty. I'm watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. right now. I'm completely hooked on that. And I've got 7 seasons to watch, apparently. But, it becomes like, how often are we doing these things and why, and how is it hurting and serving us? And we'll talk more about that. But when it comes to these false fixes, they're useful for escaping a certain element of stress and for checking out. It's like that old commercial, Calgon, take me away. It's like Chips Ahoy, Merlot, take me away. But when it ends, we're left with maybe some of the guilt or the bloating or the physical discomfort of if they escape, and then the original stress is right there, and it's kind of that sandwich, right? So we're not really replenishing our reserves with these go-tos. And we may know it logically, but in the heat of the moment, it's just like, God, I need relief. And what happens is it actually, what we resist persists. So it tends to prolong the experience of feeling tapped out, burnt out, tired of it all. And when we aren't replenishing our reserves, what happens is it can add to mental, emotional, and physical dis-ease in the system. So, and one other thing too, depression is repression of emotion. Okay, depression is repression of emotion. These vices, by their very nature, sometimes they fall into addiction, but these ways in which to self-soothe, they shut down what feels like maybe a negative emotion or distress. But this is the kicker here, is that we can't selectively numb out our emotions. Wouldn't that be cool if we could do that? So if we're numbing out the not so good stuff, such as anxiety and fear and uncertainty and powerlessness and fatigue, then we're also numbing out the good stuff. We're numbing out pleasure, happiness, joy, passion, even connection, because we're insulating, we're becoming, it's like the cotton ball around. And so we're not really able to connect to ourselves or to others as well as if we were maybe not using this as much. So in case that resonates, I always want to bring that up because it's something that's been really popping up in classes and also with clientele that I work with and family and friends that share what's happening in their worlds. So with that, we might end up feeling like we're drowning in this, like, oh my gosh, help. What do I do then? How do I not go to these false fixes, but then how do I feel better? And how do I get out of what might feel like a survival mode and an enduring what is, which as we know, gets old super fast. The question is how do I get my head above water and how do I thrive and reset in the face of what is still in that tunnel? We're still in that COVID fatigue. How do I make things better? So what I want to ask you now is, with all of that in mind, which feels a little like a Debbie Downer-ish, but the good news and the ways in which to get out of this is coming up next. But I want to ask you and encourage you to explore, how are you coping with all of this? What are your go-tos? Do a self-assessment, do a self-care audit. How are you doing with it all? What are your ways to self-soothe and to cope? There's no right or wrong. You might have some healthy ones in there. You might have some unhealthy ones. I mentioned my binge watching Netflix. That's probably not super healthy, but I walk most days. I get outside, and so that's healthy. So it's like what it is for you that's working or not working. Just do an audit. What are your challenges? What are your challenges? I would love to, at this point, see if there are any questions or any comments that anyone would care to share, and I'll open it up for Connor to relay those.
Erin, we do have a couple of comments. So we had one person say that, in the warmer weather, they would get outside together with their neighbors, but hasn't been able to do that, in the winter time. And then they also say they take a 3-mile walk almost as, every day if they can, weather permitting. So that's been helpful. And some people have volunteered during this time. So just to get interaction with people. But another comment is, people just really miss people and being with people.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest loss of all that we're all experiencing is those casual social interactions, which we'll talk more about. Any other comments or any questions yet?
No questions,
Okay.
Other questions yet.
Okay. Well, let's move on. We'll have more time at the end as well to kind of open it up. So thinking about how you're coping, how you're doing, it sounds like some of you have some really great go-tos. And some of us are just kind of feeling the reality of missing what was, right? Those social connections. So despite our current reality, despite still being in that tunnel, the question is, how can we better manage our stress and thrive? How can we get our head above water? And the key here is to reclaim the fundamentals of self-care if we've let some of them go, or all of them. And when we feel better, we make better self-care choices. So the key here is to be able to create the environment, the experience of feeling better. I'm not talking the false fixes. I'm talking about the inside out ways in which we can really align with what it is that we truly need. So what replenishes you? That becomes the next question. What replenishes you? Someone mentioned walking 3 miles a day. That sounds like it's a wonderful tool. We're going to talk more about the impact of walking, but I have some images of what are fundamental for all of us as far as what we need to feel good, to thrive. Proper sleep, enough sleep, movement of some kind, connection to self, going within, and social connection. So I'm going to dive into each of these and provide resources. So if you have pen and paper, I'm going to provide some apps and some videos and to basically access more information and how to begin making a change in these if needed for you. And a little effort in each of these categories really goes a long way. So the first one is improving your sleep. when we're not getting enough sleep, it's like a house of cards. A lot suffers. Our mental, emotional, and physical health can certainly suffer. We need about 7 to 8 hours. This is probably one of the areas that went by the wayside, and has gone by the wayside for many folks because of that agitation state in their system. Chronic stress will do that, but it's like the chicken or the egg. Did lack of sleep create the chronic stress, or vice versa? I think we can all say that there was a pandemic that came into our lives, but sometimes sleep wasn't happening before, so it's like a double whammy. So the key here is to really work on, okay, how can I get better sleep? And we need to relax the body and mind before bed. Fortunately, there's an app for that. There's many apps for that, but the one that I recommend highly is called Insight Timer. And it's free. You can pay and upgrade, but there's a lot that's accessible for free, and it's a wonderful resource. There's a sleep icon on there that you can click, and it'll pull up a ton of bedtime stories if that appeals to you, lightly guided meditations, which is what I do often for myself. There's one called middle of the night meditation that if you wake up in the middle of the night and your mind starts racing, you can listen to another voice, which helps to guide you back into a relaxed state and finally into sleep. There's sleep music, there's sleep sounds. It's just a ton on there. So that's one app. I know other apps people use. Calm is a good one. I know that's a real popular one, but there's a ton of apps out there. But if you have one that you're using, keep using it. Otherwise, this is a wonderful resource. Being careful of your sleep hygiene before bed. My parents would watch the news and get really stressed out, and then they couldn't sleep. And I'm hearing that from a lot of clientele where they watch the news right up until bedtime, and then they're even more agitated based on what's in the news. The news isn't there. I mean, I'm not dissing the news. We need to be informed, but I think it's to some extent they're trying to grab a viewership. So some of the headlines can be very anxiety producing. So we want to be really careful about how much we watch the news within our day. Just temper that, and maybe not right before bed. So improving our sleep is fundamental, and maybe this is a resource that can help you to do just that if you wanted to practice with that piece if it's not going well in your world. This next one is moving your body. Our bodies are meant to move. But if you hate exercise, or if the weather isn't conducive to exercise, and it becomes challenging, but it's cringe-inducing actually. Well, there's a video that I encourage you to watch. It's called 23.5 Hours. It's on YouTube. And it was research compiled by Dr. Mike Evans. He's a preventative medical specialist. And here he talks about the impact of walking 30 minutes a day. And it's creatively done. It's only 10 minutes. And it's engaging to watch, and you'll see when you watch it. But what this research shows is that a little movement goes a long way. And it doesn't have to be walking, by the way. It can be just any kind of physical movement. It can be swimming, it can be biking, it can be dance, it can be chair aerobics, if we can't get on our legs and our feet. So it doesn't have to be walking, but the point is that 30 minutes of movement a day, and it doesn't have to all be at once. It can be 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, 10 in the evening if you have a dog that you need to walk, or it can be all at once if that's what you choose to do. But what the research shows is this, and I learned of this, over 10 years ago, and it made my jaw drop. And I was in the fitness industry, so I was kind of clued into the research. But what it does is it on average, it reduces depression by up to 32%, by a third. It reduces anxiety by up to 47%. Now this is average, so there's always people on the outside of that bell curve. But even if we have an improvement of 10%, I'll take it. I think it moves the needle toward feeling better. There's a ton of research on the impact of movement. It doesn't have to be high intensity exercise either. We're talking moderate movement, especially anxiety and depression. It's also the #1 treatment for fatigue. It helps with knee arthritis and other things. So take a look at that video. It's inspiring. And what I find is it does this. For those who are having a hard time getting any movement in, it helps it to make it feel like a more tangible goal. For those who feel like, well, if I can't get an hour running in, then why bother? It makes them realize, well, something's a lot better than nothing. It's really serving me. So it's a win-win here. So our bodies are meant to move, and maybe this will help to inspire doing just that. This next one I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, prioritizing social connection. So social connection matters, and that's, as someone already mentioned, boy, have we missed that in the last year. Not being able to visit loved ones, even just the casual interactions at, say, restaurants, Starbucks, the gym, church, whatever it is that we get that fix. There's been a vacuum of not having that, and that has had an impact for sure. Look, occasional feelings of loneliness, it's normal. Okay, so I'm talking more about the chronic experience of loneliness. And what's happening now since COVID is that there's also a chronic experience of isolation. There was an epidemic of loneliness that was happening before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, a lot more of us are grappling with maybe wasn't in our experience before. And I guess the silver lining of the pandemic is that now we're talking about social connection more. We're normalizing the experience of loneliness rather than stigmatizing it. It's being talked about a lot more. I want to point you to a TED Talk. So this here is the kind of sums up the certainly the research on loneliness, but then also this TED Talk that I'll talk about in a second, that the quality and quantity of our social relationships has been linked not only to mental health, but also to physical health and longevity. So there's a TED Talk with Susan Pinker, and it's called The Secret to Living Long May Be Your Social Life, which is probably disheartening considering the last year, but wait for it. There is some good news coming. But she looked at the top 10 predictors of mortality. And this fascinated me, but let me just kind of call out a few on that top 10 list. Number 10 was lack of clean air. Number 7 was lack of exercise. Number 4 was alcohol dependence. Number 3, I personally thought would have been number 1. But number 3 is smoking. The top 2 predictors of early mortality have to do with our social connections. Number 2 was lack of close personal relationships. Those are the relationships where that person, you can call on that person in a time of need. It could also be that person that sees you, that gets you, that you can talk to uncensored. Even just one of those folks matters. Even if it's a therapist, it's okay. Okay. Somebody that really, even though that's not a personal relationship, it's a therapeutic relationship, it's better than nothing. The number 1 indicator of early mortality was lack of social interactions. These are the people that you see out and about, okay? The gym, the church, the coffee shop, the community connection. We are hardwired for social connection. It is primal. We are social creatures, and even the most introverted among us need connection. So when the pandemic hit, what happened was, so when you think about temperament, there's introversion and extroversion. Introverts regroup by being by themselves. They need social connection to some extent, but the way in which they regroup is to be by themselves. I'm one of those people. Extroverts, on the other hand, they regroup by being with others. Okay, so who do you think suffered the most when the pandemic first hit and these social interactions came to a screeching halt? In the work that I'm doing, it was more of the extroverted personalities that felt the initial sting. But what's happening is that a year in is that we're all feeling the impact of that, even the most introverted among us, because we need those social connections. When it's missing, we suffer. We're not meant to be isolated and alone. So what we want to do with that information is really make sure that we are, yes, physically distancing. So, the mandate of social distancing, I always like to say, it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing. Let's make sure that our social connections are still happening physically distanced. We can be with our mask, we can be outside with somebody, walking with the mask, we can have our virtual connection socially. We want to make sure that those social interactions are happening, even though they're not in person as much as they used to be. This is so crucial. So often I'll hear from clients of mine who are fellow introverts. So they'll be like, Erin, I can't just make friends. It was hard for me when I could actually be face to face or out in the, out and about, let alone now, it's even more challenging. So we really want to start simple here. So it's thinking about, who have you not talked to in a while? Who maybe have you lost contact with, whether within the last year or over the years, or even the last few months? Start there. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend. I work with a lot of caretakers, and often what I'll hear from them is, "But Erin, I don't want to burden anyone. I don't want to burden." But this is the deal. I guarantee you that you reaching out to that friend will be as much of a service to them as it is to you. So thinking about who in your world that you can connect with and reach out to, take the initiative. Don't assume that they don't want to hear from you if they're not initiating first, okay? Getting outside if the weather is okay for you to do that, and getting out and about, meeting people outside has been certainly something that a lot of folks are doing. Virtual connections, yes, in person is the best way to do that, but it is better than nothing. Make sure that, and it's even better than phone. If we can see their face and their facial expressions, it actually is a more connective experience. So if you don't mind doing Zoom or some kind of modality to see that person, FaceTime, I would encourage you to do that in addition to the phone conversations. It does matter. And then I always like to put this one in there. There's a online social network website called Meetup. Now, this was originally created for in-person meetings, so that will happen in time. But for now, they've shifted a lot of their meetups to virtual. You can have a virtual book club, virtual art club, virtual everything club that you can think of. You put in your zip code and it pulls up meetings in your area. And although a lot of these are virtual, it still gets you kind of that foot in the door to meet people with like-minded interests. These count, these matter. And so this helps to undo the statistic that I just relayed to you. It really is important to prioritize your social connection so that you're not doing this alone. It's really going to matter. So if that resonates, I just encourage you to certainly reach out. There is a wonderful resource that I also want to point you to called connect2effect.org. They created an assessment. So if you're like, well, I don't know, I think I'm doing okay socially, but maybe I'm not. Or you want to know kind of where you're on the spectrum of loneliness and isolation, there's an assessment online. This is for no matter what age you are. It's not just for, it's AARP, but it's for any age. Go online, take the assessment. And what's wonderful is at the end of the assessment, it gives you resources, tools, ways in which to engage, to reach out for support, to volunteer in your neighborhood, in your area. It's a wonderful resource, highly recommend it. And then another way to get support too is if you're finding that, gosh, there's really no one in my life right now that I really want to talk to or just reach out to. It's just, we all have seasons in our life where that might be just the reality of what is, and it can be temporary, but it just is. So psychologytoday.com, and you can get support through therapy. It's teletherapy. It makes it more accessible. You can do it in the comfort of your living room. It's quite lovely. But that's a resource that I'm referring folks to if they want to find a therapist that is licensed in the state that they reside in. Okay, so that's a wonderful option as well. Don't go it alone. Last but definitely not least is this need, and I think, I don't want to say forced circumstance, but in a kind of way of, I think we've all had a lot more quiet and alone time potentially, or most of us, depending on who we live with or not, to go within. Maybe there's more quiet time to be able to do that. How is your connection to yourself through all of this? Do you like your own company? How are you engaging with your interests, with your activities? How are you calming and resourcing from within? What do you enjoy? And so this is important because when you think about anxiety and stress, and I work with a lot of folks who have anxiety, and so there's rumination, just that call it the rabbit hole. We go into that way of thinking where one thought leads to another, and it's just the worst case scenario thinking. And it's terrifying. Our thoughts are powerful. They are super powerful, because where a thought goes, a chemical goes. And also our thoughts dictate our emotions, and our emotions dictate our behavior. So we want to be careful about what we run away with up here. Going within, sometimes we're like, I don't want to go in there. I want to be quiet with my thoughts. My thoughts are not comforting. If that's the case, then I highly recommend experimenting with some activities, some hobbies, some ways in which to engage within yourself and of yourself to where it's calming and centering. Meditation is certainly, it's abundantly researched around the world that little as a few minutes, 5-10 deep breaths even, which isn't meditation, but it's focused breathing, it's mindfulness. It helps to calm and center. It lowers our blood pressure. It makes us feel better. They've done research on hand, on heart. Just this motion of calming ourselves in that moment. A little goes a long way here. And so with meditation, Insight Timer is an app. Literally hundreds of meditations that are available on there that you can play with. Tara Brach is one of my favorites, BRACH. She also has her own website. Kristen Neff has some, NEFF. It's self-compassion, loving kindness meditation. But play around with that. Start with 5 minutes if you're new to meditation. And if the idea of meditating makes you cringe, you don't have to do it. Go on a walk. Or, find other ways in which that makes you feel calm and centered, or those things that actually just make you laugh. Laughter nothing is like being in the moment, like laughing. There's a radio station here in Colorado it's like 24/7 comedian loop. So anytime I'm in my car, I have that on. So it really becomes, how are you engaging? How are you going within? It's going to matter as well. I love this quote by Dr. Edith Eger. She's a Holocaust survivor, psychologist. She's a 93-year-old woman. And when I heard this quote from her on a podcast I listened to recently, it made me stop, because of her history and her experience. The Holocaust is much different than a pandemic. Yes, undoubtedly. But in the end, she says, it's not what happens to us that matters most. It's what we choose to do with it. Another quote by her is, everything has a gift in it. And it's hard to see the gift in struggle and suffering and what feels very, very hard and very, very sad. But I guess I encourage you with that, those wise words from her is, are there any silver linings that you've experienced in the last year? What are the gifts, if any, that you have had happen to you that maybe couldn't have happened without this new norm that we're in? The key is to pan out and have a broader perspective, not to just what we've lost, but to what we've gained, how we've grown, certainly grown stronger. It's like the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But within that, how can we actually take a moment to honor that? To not discount the suffering and the grief and the loss and what's been hard about this. Absolutely don't want to discount that. I'm not negating that. But can we also at least turn and look at maybe those ways in which we've grown from it and grown stronger as a result? Just remember to breathe, take one day at a time. If any of this resonates, start with whatever kind of piqued your interest. Start there first. There's some resources that I listed. Just take it one day at a time, one breath at a time, and you can absolutely thrive in the face of adversity. While we're still in this tunnel, while there's a light at the end of it, we're still in it, and we can absolutely thrive in the midst of what feels very, very challenging still. So hopefully this was helpful. I would like to open it up now to any questions, comments that you might have with all of that.
Erin, thank you so much. This was really, really helpful today. And I hope, everyone walks away with something new to think about or interesting. We had a couple comments while you were talking. So Mary said that she is reading voluminously, sewing, attending Zoom classes, but she is struggling with some too much of that togetherness time.
Okay.
She's caring for a spouse with Alzheimer's.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering what your sources of support are, if you've been just getting assistance and help with that, and if you're getting out of the house. I have a dear friend whose father is dealing with the same thing, and and I don't know your situation, but for him, he's struggling with the guilt of not being there all the time, and then kind of tempering that with his own needs. So that's where it's we got to fill up our own tank in order to show up for those that are relying on our care. So I would just say make sure that you're getting your own support, even if it's virtual right now, or if you have an aide that's coming in. But yeah, so that's a challenging situation. That's a lot of together time. So your resourcing from within will be key, and also with other people.
Betsy said that she started books on tape and podcasts at nighttime. It helps her fall asleep easier.
Yeah.
And she sets the sleep mode on her phone.
Great. Yeah, very helpful. It just helps the body to get into that relaxed state. So that's great.
Any other questions from anybody? We'll give it just a couple more seconds. All right. Well, Erin, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, I just say take good care. And again, one step at a time. So I wish you all well.
Okay. Well, we hope to see you soon again. Joy wrote a comment. She says this has been very helpful. So thank you.
Good.
And if anyone wants to email Erin, she's always willing to, I know, answer your questions very thoughtfully.
Yes.
And her email, I wrote it in the chat, but it's also here. So it's erinrecious@gmail.com. And anyone, if you're looking for information after the session, feel free to reach out to me and I can point you towards Erin. Erin, thank you so much, and be safe in Colorado. And we hope to see you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take good care. Bye-bye.